Welcome to episode 25 of the David Binkowski podcast. Today's episode is going to talk about data, and who doesn't love data, right? We're going to talk about data, and the reason that this is important is because things are a-brewing here in Puerto Rico. There is some change happening, and it's not just my observations. There are numbers to back this up. And so the first segment of this podcast, my guest is Manuel Alvarez Rivera. Manuel is a webmaster who has been running an election website, in fact, a few of them that you can get to by going to his personal website at manuelalvarez.net. So, why is he on? Well, I see stuff shifting and changing, and I want to make sure that I'm seeing things appropriately, for starters. The way you can follow Manuel, if you're not, by the way, on Twitter, is by going to Alvarez Rivera. So the letter M for Manuel and then Alvarez Rivera. And so we're going to talk about that data and what does he see? Non-biased, non-partisan, just what do you see with the data? Because there's some stuff happening here. The second part of the podcast, it has two leaders from Juventud, PIP, which is the Youth Puerto Rican Independence Party. First, we have Gabriel Torres, and he's going to join us from, he runs the JPIP Bayamón Twitter handle. So if you're on Twitter, please give JPIP Bayamón a follow. And then I also had on, there was a gathering, a conference of all the different Juventud PIPs, or PEEP as they say, of the island. That happened recently in August of 2021, where they got together all the different chapters of Juventud PEEP together in one location to meet and strategize and come up with basically a handbook or playbook on how they're going to operate, which is a pretty big thing. You love to see kids organizing and getting together. And so I wanted to have Ian Piovanetti on, and he runs JPIP San Juan on Twitter, and they're on Facebook and all those things as well. So please check them out. But I wanted to have them on to talk about their conference and what it was all about. And then we also talked through some of the myths about independence. And this is one of the things I think is extremely important for people, maybe who aren't from Puerto Rico, but especially if you live here, to understand what are the myths, because there's stuff that's said, especially online, that's just false. And there are a lot of scare tactics, and there are a lot of things that are said that, quite frankly, are not true. And so I want to ask the guys to tell me, this is what I see, true or false. So we're going to listen to that. If you're not following me on Twitter, I'd be shocked, but I'm at D Binkowski. The podcast has its own handle, in case you don't want to look at my stuff and just know when there's a new episode out. Obviously, you should subscribe on all your favorite platforms, and you can also follow the show at TDBP Official on Twitter. Again, each person that's on this podcast has their own handles. Please follow them and get involved, because discourse is good. Asking questions is even better. And learning is the absolute best. So I encourage you to do that. Follow everyone on this podcast. And if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please rate 5 stars and leave us a nice review. Now, let's get to those conversations. So joining me right now is Manuel Alvarez Rivera. He is M. Alvarez Rivera on Twitter, and you can visit his website at manuelalvarez.net. Manuel, welcome into the podcast.
Hello.
Thanks for joining me. If for people who don't know Manuel, I met him online a few years ago, and what Manuel does is he keeps records and he keeps data around voting. And specifically, you can go to his website, and he has several different links you can follow there and see this stuff. But he has all the different voter data that's been taking place. And I've been following you on Twitter now and watching a lot of stuff take place. And Manuel, I was wondering, could you talk about what were the big takeaways you saw from the 2020 general election here in Puerto Rico?
Well, I think the main takeaway would be that the two major parties, the pro-state New Progressive Party on the one hand, which is the ruling party in Puerto Rico and has been in power since it won the 2016 election, and the opposition Popular Democratic Party, which is pro-Commonwealth, both continued to lose ground in the gubernatorial election and also in other races. Specifically in the gubernatorial vote, the two parties together have come down from nearly 95% of the vote in 2012 to 81% in 2016, and now they barely, in fact, they fall just short of 65%. In other words, in 8 years, together they have lost 30 percentage points. This trend started in 2016 when we had two independent candidates on the ballot for running for governor. Manuel Sidre, who's now part of Governor Pedro Pierluisi's cabinet, and Alexandra Lugaro, who would parlay her success her relative success in the 2016 race into forming a new political party, the Citizens Victory Movement, in Spanish Movimiento Victoria Ciudadana, known by the acronym MVC. Those two candidates, to everyone's surprise, pulled together 17% of the vote, and that was quite a major blow for the two major parties. But what I've been perceiving is that, by and large, the leadership of the two major parties remains in denial about the changes that are taking place, that have been taking place since 2016. They either ignore them altogether, or they try to explain them away as the product of transient circumstances or model design. I mean, I heard just about every conceivable explanation other than accept that, yes, we are losing ground. Now, some Popular Democratic Party leaders do recognize that things are changing. And the thing is that after what happened in 2020, Puerto Rico has, in effect, a multi-party system. I can no longer speak of a two-party system now. Again, some major party leaders insist that is not so. The two-party system is strong. Look, we won all the single-member legislative district races. We won between the two parties, all the mayoral races. But they often overlook that it's not so much that they're winning all of them, but how they're winning all of them. For example, in 2016. The two major parties have indeed all won between themselves all 40 House districts, but of those 40 House districts, 23 were won by absolute majorities. In 2020, only 3 were won by absolute majorities. Because the two parties have continued to lose support to the point that in 2020. Many representatives won their seats with percentage shares lower than those of the candidates they defeated 4 years earlier.
And so, as part of that that denial that they're in, I mean, those are stark numbers. That's not a small change. That's not 5%, 10%. That's 30+%. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And are there? And we know that. For example, our current governor did not even get 33% was what he got of the votes.
Yes, we come from 2012 when the Popular Democratic Party elected Alejandro Garcia Padilla with almost 48% of the vote, to 2016 when Ricardo Rosselló of the New Progressive Party won with 42%, and now Pedro Pierluisi wins in 2020 with just 33% of the vote. That's the lowest share ever for winning gubernatorial candidates. In fact, it's the lowest share ever for the New Progressive Party and the Popular Democrats, which won 31.5% in the gubernatorial election. Again, it's their lowest percentage ever, even lower than the 38% they pulled on their debut in 1940.
And so correct me if I'm wrong, but at 33%, that presents some limitations or restrictions on the governor. He's not allowed to pick the head of his Senate, correct?
Well, the thing about the election was that in the legislative races, there was not only a virtual delegate among the two parties, but the way in which the votes were distributed, the Popular Democratic Party managed to win a plurality of seats in the Senate and a one vote seat majority in the Puerto Rico House of Representatives. This was so because although the two parties were head to head in terms of the popular votes, and in fact, in the Senate, and the New Progressive Party Senate district candidates had a very small plurality. Their votes were concentrated in the districts in and around the San Juan metro area. And they ended up racking up uselessly large majorities, whereas in the rest of the island, and they ended up, for the most part, losing by narrow margins. And that allowed the Popular Democratic Party to win a majority of district seats in both houses. However, the Popular Democratic Party made a fatal miscalculation, particularly in the Senate. We have, in addition to the district seats, there are 16. There are 8 Senate districts. Each elects 2 senators by plurality voting. And each Senate district in turn is subdivided in 5 House districts for a total of 40 House districts. They are also elected by plurality voting. In addition to those seats, we have 11 at-large seats in each House. They're elected by what internationally it's known as the single non-transferable vote system, although no one in Puerto Rico uses that term. It's a semi-proportional system. And in that system, small parties can usually elect at least one senator by just nominating a single candidate and concentrating all their votes around that candidate. However, in this election, the Citizens Victory Movement decided to nominate 2 candidates in each house. And on top of that, we had another new party, the Dignity Project, a Christian conservative party, which also nominated 1 candidate. And to everyone's surprise, both candidates from MVC in both houses and the candidates from Dignity Project and the candidates of the Independence Party all were elected. Again, the Independence Party has for many years been nominating a single candidate to maximize its possibilities of having him or her elected in each house. The Popular Democrats, before the election, contemplated going from having 6 candidates out of a possible 11 seats to just 5. Unfortunately, some all-party stalwarts intervened, and basically they said this is a mistake. It makes us lose weak. There's an odd in play. Blah 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 blah. The party nominated 6 candidates for each house, and to their dismay, they only elected 2. That is the worst performance by the Popular Democrats in an at-large election since the 1952 Constitution increased the number of at-large seats to 11. I mean, you can go all the way back to the time the Popular Democratic Party was founded, and you will not find a worse performance.
Wow.
They were warned, and they chose not to pay attention to the warnings that were made by people in the know.
Interesting. I follow a lot of the data. Again, if you're not following Manuel on Twitter, it's M. Alvarez Rivera. But if you're not following him, he posts threads pretty regularly detailing all this stuff and the fact that people would ignore it. You remain nonpartisan when you post. You just post the facts and the data.
Yes.
And so to me, I work in data, so I'm agnostic to where it comes from or how I get it. So it's interesting that someone would ignore it. And I can't say that I've not seen that before, because I have in the marketing world as well. But it's a little different in that situation. I think that from a political standpoint, with these parties losing ground, it's really opened the door for MVC and for PIP to some extent. Not, I don't think as much, but they've done historically better than they've ever done. Correct?
Well, the Independence Party had its best result in 64 years. In fact, in a gubernatorial election, they won. In the gubernatorial election, they won nearly 14% of the vote. And it's the first time since 1956 they break into double-digit territory. They have been stuck between 3 and 6% between 1960 and 2016. And it was quite a surprise even for many Independence Party backers. I have a friend who's a member of the party, and in her words, she felt that the party would do well, but she was skeptic that it would do that well. She said that she would need to be revived on an election night if the party did as well as it eventually did. Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. What do you think was the driver behind that? Was it just with all of the, with Ricky Renuncia and Ricardo being resigning? Do you think that had a lot to do with it? What were the main drivers for this?
And there's, broadly speaking, there's an enormous discontent with the two major parties, which have been alternating in power for over half a century. And many people say, okay, we elect the Popular Democrats. They don't do the job, so we turn to the New Progressives. They don't do the job either, and people are really disgusted with what they see as the deterioration of living standards, the deterioration of the economy, the deterioration of public services, and there's a growing mistrust around the two major parties about their ability to get the job done once they're in power. There's a sense that, in fact, some people say there's no difference between the two of them. I tend to disagree. There are still differences, but the truth is that sometimes in their stalls, in the way they go about fulfilling their duties, and they don't seem, or they don't appear to be that different, other than one advocates statehood and the other advocates Commonwealth. But again, that kind of situation you see in other countries as well. In Spain, where also you had a situation similar to Puerto Rico a few years ago. You had the Popular Party and the Socialist Party as the two major parties by far, and then suddenly in the 2015 election, they both lost considerable ground to new players. Also, there was much denialism about the change. Some said this is just transient, this is just a temporary aberration, this will not last. Well, it's been now 6 years, and there's no sign that Spain is going to go back to the way things were before 2015. So what we're seeing in Puerto Rico is by no means unique. Also, if you think of it, in the US, even though you still have the same two parties, you have one of the two parties, the GOP, which has completely changed. It has gone from being a more or less mainstream right-wing party into an extreme right-wing party, and some would say a personality cult of Donald Trump. And some people say, no, you'll see that this won't last. Once Trump is out of the scene, things will go back to normal, and things will go back to the way they were. Well, Trump is out of the presidency, and that isn't showing any sign of happening.
Right. In fact, what we're seeing is, younger candidates picking up the torch or the mantle and trying to be Trump himself, whether it's DeSantis in Florida with denying science and facts and logic, or the Governor Abbott in Texas.
Mm-hmm. Yes. There is no.
I think it's all business as is. Yeah.
There's no indication that things will go back to the quote unquote all normal, such as it was, because I must say the Republican Party pre-Trump, say circa 2015, was pretty far to the right already.
Yep. Well, and they've always it's a pendulum that's swinging, and whether it's higher wages and people not going back to work, or it's people taking COVID seriously and not, there's a lot of change that's happening in the U.S. because that pendulum has swung super far to the right. I just wonder here, what's the appetite, do you think, for some actual change? I mean, there's the numbers are showing things are changing. And one of the things that I see quite frequently are a lot of straw man arguments, a lot of bogeyman type of stuff. We're like, oh, if this happens, then this awful stuff. Like if independence wins, we're Cuba, right? These are the kind of nonsense things that you see on Twitter, when in fact there are a lot of independent countries that are not communist or like Cuba. But do you think there's an appetite, I guess? I mean, the numbers are saying yes, but do you think there's a real appetite for this?
Okay, I wrote 25 years ago on Usenet on Puerto Rico. Yes, I know. That dates me. And that many Puerto Ricans have this instinctive fear of independence as a quick flight towards poverty and dictatorship. And that fear predates Castro's Cuba. Before Fidel Castro came around, the bogeyman of choice of those opposed to independence was the seemingly endless dictatorship of Trujillo in the Dominican Republic, who held power for 31 years until he was assassinated 60 years ago.
Yep.
And back in that time, people say, oh, if Puerto Rico becomes independent, it will be just another Dominican Republic. We'll end up with another Trujillo, and so on and so forth. But then, as luck would have it, Trujillo was executed, and just as that happens, Fidel Castro goes full communist. So we switch from one bogeyman to another, from the far right to the far left. And now, that's what you hear these days. If Puerto Rico becomes independent, it will inevitably become another Cuba. It will go communist. And I must say again, those kind of fears are not totally unique to Puerto Rico. For example, in South Africa, the white minority was absolutely convinced for a long time that if they share power with the black majority would rush to establish a one-party communist regime, nationalize everything inside, and probably expel all the whites in the process. That, of course, didn't come to pass because by the time South Africa moved towards a multi-party democracy, the communist bloc in Eastern Europe and then later in the USSR itself collapsed. In fact, it was that collapse helped South Africa move towards a multiracial democracy, because on the one hand, the whites no longer had their bogeyman of choice around, and on the other hand, the black nationalist movement lost a source of support, mostly not really material, but there was a considerable moral support. And it also made them realize that for some of them, not all of them were communists. Mandela certainly wasn't a communist, but it made them realize that the political and economic model of Eastern Europe and the USSR was no longer viable, that they needed to accommodate the whites and accept capitalism, as a matter of fact, which they did. Of course, they did so because the white liberals seized on the opportunity to influence Mandela and persuade him to go that route. And as it was, South Africa has not turned to communism. Also, there was another interesting aspect to that. Usually, when white South Africans say this country will turn into a dictatorship, this and that, they will go communist, they usually ignored that one of their neighbors, Botswana, had a very successful democratic regime. And much in the same way in Puerto Rico, when I hear, Puerto Rico will become another Cuba, another Venezuela, another Nicaragua. And what about Costa Rica? Costa Rica has had a democracy going on for nearly 125 years with just a couple interruptions, a brief dictatorship between 1917 and 1919 and a very short civil war in 1948. But other than that, it has been ruled by democratically elected regimes for most of that time. But curiously, Costa Rica rarely comes up in the discussions about independence. It's always the worst case scenario. And to be certain, I think there's some reason to be concerned that an independent Puerto Rico might veer towards authoritarian rule, something like what you are seeing in El Salvador under President Bukele. But one thing is to say that's a possibility. Another thing is to say that's a given. And that's where I just don't agree with these narratives that it's inevitable. I don't consider it inevitable. I consider it a cause to be concerned. That is that I would be lying to you if I said I'm not worried about that prospect if Puerto Rico became independent. But I don't think it's necessarily what it has to happen inevitably, which is what most opponents of independence, especially stateholders and particularly those on the far right, keep pushing day and night.
Right. And I've seen that firsthand, some of the comments and things like that. And I think it's easy to look at other countries and discount the ones that are having success, and only point to the bad because it's a scare tactic instead of promoting the possibility of what these things may bring if, let's say, statehood did happen. That's not the argument that they push. It's always to try to discredit the other side instead of push their own, which to me shows they don't have much of an argument. Manuel, do you think that this trend is going to continue, that we're going to continue to see lack of support for PNP and for PPD?
I think there's a distinct possibility that in the 2024 election, we'll go from what political scientists will describe as a multi-party system with two dominant parties into a full multi-party system with four major parties. I think there's a very real chance that we could end up with a four-way race in 2024 with the New Progressives, the Popular Democrats, the Independence Party, and the Citizens Victory Movement all around the low to mid-20s. And the Dignity Project probably closing on 10%. So that, I think, could happen. I can't say for certain that it will. In fact, I would say that right now, the best that the two major parties can hope, the best that the New Progressives and the Popular Democrats can hope in 2024 is that the result of the election will be similar to that of the 2020 election in the regular polling places where 83%, 5 out of 6 voters cast their ballots last November. I say the regular polling places because in those polling places, and the two major parties barely broke 60% together. They made it to nearly 65% with the outcome of the special polling stations where people cast advance ballots and in smaller amounts provisional ballots or ballots that could not be tallied by the vote counting machines and had to be counted by hand, but mostly advance ballots, and those advance ballots were mostly cast by voters over the age or at 60, that is 60 or over. And we know, because those votes were tallied separately, that that older electorate was still remained far more beholden to major parties than the rest of voters. But even so, and that's something that still surprises me, the Independence Party, among that largely older electorate, managed to win nearly 7% of the vote for governor. And that result alone is better than any result obtained by the Independence Party island-wide between 1960 and 2016. And again, it's significant because it's precisely the older generation that's the one that's more resistant to the idea of independence, and the ones that are more inclined to say independence we will become a dictatorship, we'll die of hunger, this and that.
Interesting. Well, Manuel, this is fascinating, and it's going to be interesting to see what the ground game is going to be for all the parties moving forward. Can they continue to have outreach and do that outreach and make headway? And the biggest question for me, I've only been here 3 years, but in seeing that erosion and in seeing some of the younger people get more involved and continue to do the grassroots work that's required to actually educate people and have honest discussions, it's going to be very interesting to see. I think you're right, but we'll see how the numbers play out, that we're going to see these other parties continue to gain ground as the majority parties, quote unquote, for now, continue to lose ground. Again, Manuel, thanks for coming on. If you don't follow him on Twitter, please do that. It is well worth your time. It is M. Alvarez Rivera, and his website is manuelalvarez.net. Manuel, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
You're welcome. A pleasure.
That was part one. My interview with Manuel. A lot of great takeaways there, and the numbers don't lie. The majority parties here are sliding. Other parties are rising. And there's a reason for that. You can't go 60 plus years as a party running on an idea or a political campaign based on an idea that you can't fulfill. And this has been my biggest, it's not a complaint, but observation. And the thing that I've seen people here resist the most is the reality. And I get it if you've never been to the US. I get it if you've never lived there, if you don't understand the climate, the culture, whatever. But there are people in that party who know better. They know better. And so it's built on a lie. When Joe Biden says, don't even bring it up to me, when he wants to create a task force to quote unquote fix Puerto Rico, when a counter bill to the statehood bill has more support than the statehood bill, those are not things that would lead me to believe that people are being honest about the situation. And when you're not dealing with facts, honesty, and the truth, then you are gaslighting first and foremost. But second, you're never actually going to get to a solution that's going to help the people. And I think that's the most frustrating thing. People can banter all they want online and go back and forth. And I talked about on a previous episode with Arturo, we can scream about it all we want, and none of it changes, because the fact remains it's an unfulfilled promise that the U.S. themselves said ain't going to happen. So when a door closes, that means another one opens. And this is why I wanted to have the kids from PIP on, the young men from PIP on, to talk about what they're doing and clarify their platform and clarify what it is they're doing and talk about some of the myths. Because look, you spend 5 minutes online and mention independence and someone will scream Cuba, as Manuel alluded to. And it's a ridiculous argument. The person saying that stuff should not be taken seriously. Jumping to the worst possible conclusion of something when there's no history that supports it especially in 2021. It's just insanity. So again, when you've misinformed people for 60 years and lied to them for 60 years, why not add another one on the pile, right? So I digress. This conversation is a three-way discussion, by the way, and it sounds like we're in a room together. And it's good. You can hear some young men who have a goal. They're educated, and they have a plan. And more than anything else, as someone who runs a business, as a coach, as a trainer, if you do things without a plan, you are going to fail. There's dumb luck, sure, but having a plan means everyone can buy in, get on board, etc. And so if everyone's marching in the same direction and these numbers hold up, but these boys are onto something big here. So enjoy the conversation with Ian, JPIP, San Juan, and Gabriel, JPIP, Bayamón. That was part one. My interview with Manuel. A lot of great takeaways there, and the numbers don't lie. The majority parties here are sliding. Other parties are rising. And there's a reason for that. You can't go 60 plus years as a party running on an idea or a political campaign based on an idea that you can't fulfill. And this has been my biggest, it's not a complaint, but observation. And the thing that I've seen people here resist the most is the reality. And I get it. If you've never been to the US, I get it. If you've never lived there, if you don't understand the climate, the culture, whatever. But there are people in that party who know better. They know better. And so it's built on a lie. When Joe Biden says, don't even bring it up to me, when he wants to create a task force to quote unquote fix Puerto Rico, when a counter bill to the statehood bill has more support than the statehood bill, those are not things that would lead me to believe that people are being honest about the situation. And when you're not dealing with facts, honesty, and the truth, then you are gaslighting first and foremost. But second, you're never actually going to get to a solution that's going to help the people. And I think that's the most frustrating thing. People can banter all they want online and go back and forth. And I talked about on a previous episode with Arturo, we can scream about it all we want, and none of it changes because the fact remains it's an unfulfilled promise that the U.S. themselves said ain't going to happen. So when a door closes, that means another one opens. And this is why I wanted to have the kids from PIP on, the young men from PIP on, to talk about what they're doing and clarify their platform and clarify what it is they're doing and talk about some of the myths. Because look, you spend 5 minutes online and mention independence and someone will scream Cuba, as Manuel alluded to. And it's a ridiculous argument. The person saying that stuff should not be taken seriously. Jumping to the worst possible conclusion of something when there's no history that supports it, especially in 2021. It's just insanity. So again, when you've misinformed people for 60 years and lied to them for 60 years, why not add another one on the pile, right? So I digress. This conversation is a three-way discussion, by the way, and it sounds like we're in a room together. And it's good. You can hear some young men who have a goal. They're educated, and they have a plan. And more than anything else, as someone who runs a business, as a coach, as a trainer, if you do things without a plan, you are going to fail. There's dumb luck, sure, but having a plan means everyone can buy in, get on board, etc. And so if everyone's marching in the same direction and these numbers hold up, well, these boys are onto something big here. So enjoy the conversation with Ian, JPIP, San Juan, and Gabriel, JPIP, Bayamón. Joining me today from Partido, Independentista, Puertorriqueño are Ian, Piovanetti from JPIP San Juan, and Gabriel Torres from JPIP Bayamón. Guys, welcome to the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here, David. Thank you very much.
Pleasure's all mine. We follow each other on Twitter. If you don't follow them, it's JPIP San Juan and JPIP Bayamón on Twitter. So give them both a follow. And you can see what they're doing. But what I want them to tell everybody and our listeners is what just happened. So Juventud PIP was a historic assembly that just took place in San Lorenzo. Ian, you had such a big hand in that. I'd like you to tell people, what that was all about first and foremost.
Well, okay. So what happened in San Lorenzo? So we went to this place that had this city called La Fraternidad in San Lorenzo, and we really prepared it a lot more than it used to be a weekly, every single thing. We actually spent a month looking for a place to do this because it was very difficult to actually get a place to have an assembly with more than like 150 people inside a building during the pandemic when cases are going up. So we've actually had to postpone this process like 6-7 times. Like our first assembly was March. So we actually left that completely and said, we April, and just so kept going until rapidly switched to August. And we honestly thought that the coronavirus pandemic would need a lot more control, and it was. We always see about a bit of a backlash in these couple of weeks. So we had to follow, to set the place to be open. And since we already have so much followers, we already spent so long in this. We said it has to happen. I mean, we've set it down since March. We need to do this right now, or we're not going to be moving the way that we want to. So we got there. It was about 200 people. We had buses coming from Aguadilla or Partido, from San Juan, Manuel Alvarez, and buses. So we have buses taking more people already together. And it honestly turned out real, because we packed the place. There was people like selling up and just like, all right, no receipts left. So just got to sit here for the next 2 hours. And it started raining a lot, and just like a lot of bad things that happened, but no one's been left on that. It was honestly so good to see just how 200 members of the Puerto Rican youth in one post. Like, organize, it's probably the easiest thing you can do. A lot of it's like confirm or just like not go, or it's a lot of process about just like making it so much more difficult. So we honestly got prepared through a couple of months. I'm not gonna say that I would like the most of the work, because there was so much people that worked on it. There was like 10, 15 people that literally spent like 9 away and just like getting every detail on this to be perfect. We planned like the transportation from what the leaders that were going to be where. We called every single aspect. We called giving out book festival, just so for someone we actually have a lot of efforts directed towards. But we made a 300 alcohol, which is like a whole. And then it honestly, like, amounted to a good stuff. And such a big turnout. And yeah, the always the we actually reinforced stuff. Do think ourselves. At the time, and it was actually people like, well, just also. I saw a poster on the street, and I came. It's just like insane how every single detail of work actually got this moment and actually made this possible.
Well, I've been part of putting together events and stuff, and it's no small task. So I know I can only imagine the amount of work, especially getting people from all over the island to try to come to one place at one time. So tell people what exactly this was all about. Why was there this gathering? 200 people. I saw the photos online, so I was very impressed. I need to learn more about this. So tell people who don't know what this was. What was the gathering all about?
All right, so the gathering was probably just like the culmination of a month process that took place to both symbols on just like on a weekly, okay, just like we try to get city community organized up until the last detail. So we, like, the best way what we can. So we still like $6 on, like, at the level.
It was basically, we've been planning and congregating, discussing, just overall, it's been a process of months and months of reunions between all the youth to discuss a rule book around organization, and a rule book that not only we can agree on, but also the leadership in the PIP part.
Yeah. Honestly, it's like it's all and everything, and it's not like the only thing that came out. It's the rule. We actually we do really can see it's very present in our protest. Can see it's present in the streets. You can see it's present in all of the activities that were like promoting the party, the founder, and mayor. We're just trying to do all that stuff work that needs to be done for people to understand that we're doing this. We want independence for our nation. Why the reasons why we're doing it is just not something well, just part of based in power. But no, we actually want this to have like the biggest outcome that we want, and we every single like it might be the biggest thing that might happen. Cause you need to be perfect in this because right now everything that's happening all over the world, that's happening in the organization, there's people everywhere trying to just find a needle in the haystack and just like pinch out and just like hit fake. It's honestly just like so relieving just being everyone so organized, so cohesive, and just like unified. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's impressed me the most about what you've been doing, and this is not just for San Juan and Bayamón, but just all over the island, is that the message, and all the way up to obviously Juan Dalmau, but it's getting the message out in a grassroots way and being positive. And when I started looking at, who am I going to vote for and all these kinds of things, I want to see a platform. I want to see a plan. I'm a planner. I like to know what's going to happen when possible. I'm also an adventurous person, but I like to know if you're going to have success, whether it's building a house, building a company, starting up anything, you have to have a plan. Just winging it is not enough, or having a slogan is not enough. And I think one of the things that like I said, that I really like about what PIP is doing is there's a plan. This is what we stand for. These are the things we want to do. And I would say that even if it's not something that, when I looked at every piece of the platform that Juan put out, let's grow our own food. We need to have less food insecurity. Who would disagree with that concept? We need better education. Who would disagree with that concept? So like all these things are not necessarily, I think the platform itself speaks so loudly for what this movement's about. And the notion of doing it in a positive way is quite honestly very refreshing, because it's easy to see hate and vitriol on the line. It's easy to watch somebody try to slam somebody else, or that to me is where it becomes very toxic. And I think the way you're going about this, especially doing with young people, is admirable. And it's a way that if I were doing something, that's how I would want to do it. And so I really like what you're doing there. Now, outside of, the shirts and books, was the main purpose just to get everyone together in one place and do that and get this playbook. So it's like, hey, if you're going to do this, we have to do this in a consistent manner, which again that's part of being a good organization is consistency. Was it this rule book and the thing you put together, was it just about creating that consistency so that when things happen around the island, it's not different in one place?
So sorry to roll out. I'm talking a lot about this will be my last probably, but I just wanted to say that it's important, just like other than having this rule book, having all these young people in the same place, all cohesive with their ideas. It's more than a rule book, because it kind of gives you the idea of what people will do after this is an independent nation. It kind of gives you of what should be we should be doing to get to this. So it's more than it's a plan for a nation. It's part of our future. It's a plan for a future of our kids or our grandkids, anyone. And it's obviously it's very unifying and very good for what to feel that everyone is just come together, and that we might have internal discussions and call, but we all just agree to common purpose that smoke have to lose, and we just know that if we don't do this, no one will do this. So we're just we're moving along. So where the current takes us.
So I would say,
Go ahead, Gabriel. Yep.
I would say that in addition to the rule book, in addition to being an activity where from all over the island can congregate, it does give you a sense of purpose and unity, because these people, especially, I'm speaking for myself. I live in Bayamón, so I don't get to go outside of the metro area a lot on my free time. And when you live in an area and you don't go outside of it that much, you do get a sense of permanence. This is all I know. This is my area. This is my bubble. And when you see people that have the same goals, that have the same ideas, that have the same purpose as you do, and they live on another part of the island that you don't even talk to them, you don't even see them, but you know they're there. You know they exist because you came to this one area, this one spot where we all came together and said, this is what we want. This is what we believe. And this is our future. Our future is Puerto Rico as a nation, united, the youth, with old people, with anybody who wants to be with us as a nation, as free and independent people. You're here to stay with us. Anywhere, anytime, any place, any person can join Juventud PIP and join PIP and feel proud of it, because there isn't hate, there isn't vitriol, there isn't fear between us. It's positivity, it's commonality, it's purpose, it's union.
Yep, it's very different from a lot of the other stuff that you see, especially if you're online, and the attacks and the negativity and the and some of the things. So I've seen this firsthand. With not just my people attacking me, but attacking anybody who doesn't agree with them. On what they think the future of the island might be, or which party they belong to, whatever. It just becomes a big cesspool, quite frankly. And what I've seen a lot of, as part of that, is I've seen a lot of people pushing misinformation to try to sway opinions. Apparently, I'm not sure it doesn't work. I don't think, but because as Manuel talked about, the polling numbers and the voting numbers don't line up with what they're doing. Right? It's not working. Like you would think by looking at data, which is what I do for a living, and you see your numbers sinking, that being an asshole is not going to swing in the upswing. So. At any rate, I think it's extremely positive, encouraging, and welcome to see people who want change and do it in a way that is receptive and helpful and all these different things. So to that point, there's a lot of stuff that's pushed out there about what would an independent Puerto Rico look like, right? And I've seen this. I've seen this firsthand. I've seen the ridiculous comments. The first one is that if Puerto Rico was not part of the U.S. in some capacity, that we would turn into Cuba. That's the big one. That's the big selling point to scare off, people who ran from Cuba to Florida or whatever, and they're trying to plant that seed that we'd end up being, or Venezuela's another one, or some like poor third world quote unquote country, and that's just simply not true. I'd like can either one of you talk to that myth?
When it comes to Puerto Rican myths and specifically around something that you were speaking on, I want to preface this by saying, when you have a party that is based on one agenda, for example, they have one goal in mind, and let's say that that party has federal funds in mind, an example. So that's their goal, right? And if you have a party that does not have anything else around that plan, around that structure, or does not have something that brings people in, not just based on fear, but on, like we were stating, commonalities, things that, people want to be a part of. They feel intrigued, or they feel curious. They feel that they want to be part of this, not because they're in fear of missing out, but because it's something that they enjoy. So when it comes to that, the Puerto Rico Independence Party and what they promote, this idea, it's not about becoming independent willy-nilly, like we're gonna come all of a sudden poor, pharmacies are gonna leave, Texaco's gonna leave, all these companies, all these huge multinational corporations are just up and up gonna leave us because we're in an independent state is just false and based on fear, because no country that has ever become independent goes through that.
Right. When you look at well, this is my favorite example just because Puerto Rico wrote the Constitution, but look at Ireland. They had a setup where they were this quote unquote tax haven, and they wanted to flip the script on it. What they said was, if you're not going to invest here, then you got to go. You're not going to get your tax breaks anymore. And all of a sudden, well, they tried to hire Irish people, and the Irish income levels all went up, and prosperity went up, and they're rated one of the happiest countries in the entire world. And they're independent. No one ever said, oh, if you become independent, you're going to be like Cuba. No one ever threw that one out there when they were going through this thing, right? So it's a scare tactic. And to me, what it shows is an inability to promote your own agenda. And so I'm going to attack yours with falsehoods and false claims. And that to me it's discouraging, because what you want to see at the end of the day, if you're a voter or anybody, is you want an honesty, and you want someone to put the cards on the table so I can make a decision. And when half the cards are flip them over, it's a joker, it's full of shit, then you're like, well, there's no way I can believe in this. So this is why I think it's a huge misnomer, quite frankly. And to that end,
it also speaks to how the party operates. It's basically an in-group. It's if you are with us and you think like us, then you have no fear of missing out, of not being part of change, the movement, all that stuff. So when it comes to how PIP operates and its youth, it's completely different. It's grassroots. It is about positivity. It is about encouraging each other. It is about uplifting each other. It's about promoting health. It's about promoting equality. It's about just being pride and true Puerto Ricans who just want to work for a common good. And that is the prosperity of the island.
I honestly also want to there's like, yeah, we're going to be third world country. It's like cool, and it's like, and it's just like a false misinterpretation of what actual independence. People have a tendency to fuck the problem. It's that we go to the communists. So, I mean, where's the link? Where's the loop? I'm not saying that it's negative. About New Zealand, are they communists? I mean, I can literally list off a bunch of different, not just independent nations, but even in islands that didn't are communists, but they aren't fully right. The United States, so it's public and independent. And how can you say, well, the thing of capital, it's not. And it's like the false football, it's all structured, they know how after these get the power work. Completely follow the part that was like, we're not going to do, but we're actual since that in we're with we're actually working on ourselves to know what we want out of when in Puerto Rico. We want a social democratic movement. We want a social democratic republic that will stand for people will also invest in citizens will also invest in will also
infrastructure
on just about everything possible, and but the conditions of people don't understand that once you're referring to this typical some Puerto Ricans have which are in the work. I think so, but a lot of Puerto Ricans do live in extreme poverty. I mean, most just like I think it's about 62% of kids that actually live in poverty, and 42 that live in extreme poverty. So it's something that is quite a frozen field, and we need to move into a system that will actually benefit, will not leave us.
I think that goes to another. And from what I remember from reading Juan Dalmau's plan is that there is, I believe, a 10-year transition period that includes, those federal dollars that we can't live without, but it includes making sure that we get what the fair share is, so to speak, for the island. So to me, you can say fear of the unknown is always the easiest thing. We talked about this before we started recording, right? It's you plus our brand is a better you, or if you don't have our brand, you're going to die. And that's how the opposition to independence positions it, is that if we're not with the U.S., then we're definitely going to die. And that's just not true. In fact, if you could speak to this, and again, off before we started recording, and if you go back and listen to the Puerto Rico episode with Arturo, we talked about the number of kids that leave the island every year, the number of graduates, engineers that leave the island. So the one thing I wanted about that is, like, people say, well, Puerto Rico, you can't be independent because you don't have the resources and you just won't be affected that way, which is another myth that threw out there based on fear, right? We have, during COVID, I remember Puerto Rican scientists came up with creating their own tests and kits because they're living in the U.S. and they did that so they could help the island. And and even scientists here on the island created their own kits and tests. And to me, it's just another false statement that's based on 100% on fear. But I mean, like this, can you talk about that? Like, Puerto Rico doesn't have the resources, and you'll never be able to pull it off, which to me sounds ridiculous. But
I'll let Ian take this one.
So, honestly, just start looking at the numbers and just looking at the numbers, the money that's in year long, the capital gains that Puerto Rico has actually made off its years on island, and just like the amount of money that is actually being extracted from it. A lot of people just say, "Oh, these federal funds keep Puerto Rico look," but it's honestly just devastating to see the amount of federal funds that come here. I honestly see gone. Most of that money actually goes toward what people call assistance to most disadvantaged, like the WIC, WIC, and the XMA, which is something that something that needs to be replaced once these solar phones are gone, and it's just having more control of our borders, of our tools, will just give us a better chance at actually control the amount of money that actually leaves the islands, or will actually extend on the island, that gets invested on the island. We need a bit more of fiscalization to what investors do on the island, because most investors actually come here just tell them they're actually and hire someone to clean their pool and create jobs. They pay $60 times a year. They say, "Okay, I'm done. I made $1 million on tax and actually it's the other way around. So what Puerto Rico is actually supported, but more money is being extracted for Puerto Rico than what's being given to it."
And I just had this discussion. I was back in the U.S. talking with somebody that I didn't even know. She was like, "Oh, where you live?" And I said, "Puerto Rico." She goes, "Oh, don't we pay for everything down there?" I was like, "Actually, it's the way around." I said, "If you look at the GDP and you look at the amount of money coming in versus what goes out, it's actually a net benefit for the U.S. to have a relationship with Puerto Rico than all the way around." So yes, there's money coming, but how much is leaving? And it's a lot.
It's a lot more. It's crazy because 5 billion come in federally. That's what we get for PAN, all the assistance, all the federal benefits. That's what we get. Other than that, we spend $65 billion in U.S. goods and services. It's disproportional, the amount that leaves the island versus what comes in. And there is just no way that you can just say, oh, the scales are balanced. Oh, we have a perfect relationship. No, it's tipped.
Well, then you added things like the Jones Act, and you add like we don't control how the ports work. We don't control where they come from. We can't get things from Europe or South America or wherever it might be, because it also goes through Jacksonville to secure maritime union jobs from the U.S., which, I'm not against union jobs, but it should be competitive. It should not be a monopoly in which we have no say. And so we pay X number of dollars a gallon of milk. $6. That's crazy. Yeah, it's insane. So that's one of the things I think people don't want to admit it. Like, it's true, it's factual. I can show you these are facts. And yet in their heads, they're like, oh yeah, we paid for that place. I'm like, you don't actually, you don't. So the other piece of this that I think that there's a myth is that the culture here is based on, laziness, not wanting to contribute, and a willful ignorance, so to speak. And I've not found that to be the case. Actually, there's a labor shortage right now because there's so much work, more than anything else. To me, that's another myth that's just out there. I've met a lot of people since I moved here. I've met people who live, diaspora who are in the U.S. It's just not true. That people don't want to do stuff or work. It's just, like I said, we talked again off the air or before we recorded about this, and the U.S. is seeing this right now. The U.S. from a labor standpoint is a pendulum, and it's swung so far this way that people are working 2 and 3 jobs and they still can't afford their rent. And that's in the U.S. Now apply that here, right? That pendulum has to swing back the other way for there to be any kind of fairness or equity, for it to incentivize people. I shouldn't have to work 80 hours a week just to pay for my groceries and for a house. That's just not sustainable for anybody, not just here, anywhere. It's not sustainable. And a lot of countries are looking at their models and saying, this really doesn't fucking work, does it? Maybe a 4-day work week, maybe a 3-day work week. They're trying the different models to see how they can make it a more equitable thing. So I've always felt that was a myth that it's just simply not true. I don't know if you had anything more about that.
And just like a small comment to while we were speaking of a couple of minutes ago, it's that you said a lot of graduates that actually have master's degrees, that actually have bachelor and doctorate, and they're extremely capable people with extreme talent. But you said, well, there's opportunity for jobs, but there's not actual opportunity for progress and growth, because these jobs are part-time and are not actually specifically made for people that actually have a lot more abilities, that have worked years and years and years to maybe get the salary just because they have a master's or a doctor. And when you offer them $7.25 now, it's not viable. So people don't want to work, and that's the reason why we get so many people that leave here every single week. And it seems like it's not just professional, that's the only world here. So a lot of them are a lot professional. A lot of people like, okay, so just looking for work, and we're just not anymore. Finding it, and type of work that actually sustains weight. From here, the work we found, it's obviously not an opportunity for progress. Just it's an opportunity and system that exploits you.
So it's the Walmart model, right? You have a job, you can't live on it, so just go apply for that federal assistance that we mentioned earlier that we just love so much. Whereas opposed to if you just paid someone what they're worth, you wouldn't need it. And this is what got me kicked out of the various Facebook groups, talking about this stuff. I said, you're not a job creator, you're an exploiter. Let's be honest. And if you're going to get a tax break of any kind, the least you could do is pay it forward and make sure that the people who are actually doing the work, like the ones who are actually using their brains, sitting at desks for 8 hours, 10 hours a day, like taking away from living an actual life, then you should be compensating them fairly. And that was, I talked with a reporter about this. Her boyfriend had to leave. He graduated Colegio and he had to leave because in Arizona, they're going to pay him 4 times as much than they would here. That's exploitation. That's not a better opportunity or better. You want a person to leave an island from their family, from where they grew up, where they have all their resources, all their things are here, and go live in a desert where there's no water, but we'll pay you more money. We'll figure out the water thing later, I guess. I don't know. But like, that makes no sense to me. And for these companies that do this again goes back to the Ireland thing. And we can call the shots then. We could say, if you're going to get some incentive to set up shop here, you got to pay a living wage. You got to pay what you pay there. Otherwise, it's not equitable for anybody. It doesn't work. It's equitable for them, but not for people here. And it's, to me, that's always going to be the battle or the challenge is you always want to have companies and you want to have producing things. Like that's kind of how life works. You have to produce things and get paid for them. So you can do that as well and support, like you mentioned, a social democratic platform and all those things. It's not going to be free. We got to pay for it. But if I can't afford it, or if I can't actually, if I have to work 60 hours to make enough to not live, then what are we doing here? That to me is just straight exploitation. And people don't want to hear that. I was told I don't understand economics when I said you should pay Puerto Ricans what you pay in the U.S. I'm like, no, I do understand economics. You're just being an asshole. That's the difference.
I wanted to add to that. When it comes to low-skilled jobs and low-skilled workers and high-skilled jobs and high-skilled workers, and when it comes to way of living, these are all things that don't get discussed in economics because it involves social aspects that we like to ignore because we only want to see at the numbers. We only want to see that GDP going up. And if productivity is up, that means my pocket is getting bigger. But when we look at a society and how productive it is, an unhappy society and a suffering society, it will not be as productive as one that is not. Why? Because people won't have time to actually care, to be invested, to look at the social contract and say, I want to do this. I'll be a part of this. I'm okay with this. I'm okay with going to this place, putting in how many hours I need to put in, and then going back out and going back to my house, my family, and all of this external stuff that we always like to not involve in discussions that have to do with our jobs. And that's a very frustrating thing. When it comes to corporate culture, it's like that. It's very individualistic and it's all about business. It's you and the company. Yeah, but I have a life outside of the company. And what about my life outside of the company? The company cannot provide me the necessary funds so I can sustain my way of living. Why should I stay here? If any job does not offer me that, why should I stay here? And that's what forces Puerto Ricans to move to the United States in a disproportionate rate. They don't see opportunities here to grow. They only see exploitation.
Yeah. Well, then to that point about GDP, productivity, all those things, let's also add in health outcomes. Let's also add in prescription drug use. Let's also add in just general happiness. And again, you can look at the indexes. They do global indexes for all this stuff every year. And yeah, the U.S. makes a lot of money, but they're not happy at all. And the work-life balance is totally out of whack. And like, I was actually surprised. I was a coach in the States, and you go to games, and there'd be some parents there. You go to a game here, the entire fucking family's there. It's not like one parent. The whole family is there cheering on the son or daughter or whomever's playing. And, they push games in the U.S. to like 7 p.m. so that the parents can make it. And it's like 7 o'clock. You had to work until 6 and then get like, that's crazy to me. And so I think the U.S. is learning, by the way, like they're coming to this realization like, wow, we just worked from home and everything was more productive. Okay. Like they're coming around on that. We talked about that pendulum swinging. It's swinging back, but it's nowhere near where it needs to be. It's just not a healthy lifestyle by a stretch. So at any rate, to me, the culture of Puerto Rico is to put Puerto Ricans first. My kid comes first. And my boss says it's okay to leave. If I work at the bank or I work, because my kid's got a game at 3 and I'm going to the game. And that's how it is. And that's to me, culturally, it's just not congruent with how they do business. And to try to impose that here, to me, is just insanity. Again, having lived here for 3 years, it is a different culture here. I don't give a shit what anybody says. It's a different culture. And it's a good culture. It's a family-oriented culture. Again, my family, we've never been closer because we spent time together. We do things together. We have adventures together. We support one another. We go to the games. We do that stuff together. And so I think that it's not a matter of people don't want to work. There's a whole myriad of factors that go into that statement that need to be dissected without being generalized and being quite frankly bigoted about it, because that's what it really comes down to. So we talked about the third world country and the resources, and now they're saying, well, the other one I've seen is we don't produce enough. Puerto Rico doesn't produce enough of anything to be self-sustaining. What's your take on that one?
Ian, I'll let you take that.
First of all, it's true we don't really don't manufacture the most things. We don't have a big agriculture. But just because we don't have it doesn't mean that we don't get that. But I did. I mean, Puerto Rico has all that shit. Economic sector, and it's not really diversified its way. It's come. They come agriculture oriented economy the 50s, sorry. And after that, textile industry got really last that long. And after textile, we have manufacturing on pharmaceuticals and waivers. I don't remember exactly what I only talked to whom. But ever since that happened, we've never really had a kind of as much. And actually, that's the reason. We have wild can help in the summer economy rather the footing about for the years. So it's actually very possible to use the agricultural land because we have 600,000 wild delegates. The conversion of the manhole cells. It's a downward equipment. With a good thousands to work, but it's a lot of problem states. And it's possible to actually also possible to use out of the world and actually get the example. We have in Singapore, which is really because of its geopolitical strategical location of the world of Asia. And the Puerto Rico, which can free with the rest of the world. In between Latin America, in between the United States and North America, in Europe and Africa. And there's a lot of things that the it doesn't solve you. It goes elsewhere.
I just wanted to add to that. But when we talk about all these problems that we see in terms of our trade, why we can't trade, it's on purpose. It's an excuse to say, oh, they just can't do without us. They're just not able to. If they wanted to build a port, they would have built a port a long time ago. Well, we've had plans to build a port. We've had plans to do trade with the rest of the world. But it's a cudgel against the statehood argument. Because if you have a poor nation that needs help, that is the excuse the United States uses to intervene, to give it a little push so it can do its own thing while still holding it back close to it.
Yeah, it's frustrating to watch, especially like it's like going back and forth a little bit. I don't travel back to the US that often, but when I do go, they can get anything they want, whenever they want, however they want, and it's not a question. And we try to do the same. It's like, no, you can't. And that to me is not, we're not deciding our own fate. And with the current leadership, there's no plan other than stay the course. And that's been a failure. So to me, I don't know. When I look at like success and I look at what does that look like, and I look at how do you change something that's broken, because it's broken. we recognize it's broken. Everybody has different solutions, quote unquote, on what's going to fix it, but like they're not really solutions at all. More federal aid is not the solution. Doesn't change any of the things we just talked about opportunities, about all those things, exploitation. Doesn't fix those problems. It just continues the same pattern, except, nice roads, maybe. It's just not, it doesn't do anything for me. And we alluded to this earlier, but I just want to hit it one more time. Just because a country, and we can go through a list of all the independent countries in the world, what number of them are communists, but independence equals communism is one of the things I've heard people say. It's just, to me, flat out ridiculous. But they're playing on, in my opinion, they're playing on Latino, Cuba, Castro. Like, look what they did. That's how we're going to be. And to me, it's the stupidest straw man argument I've heard in my life.
It's an argument that you hear that works on old people because they went through the Red Scare period. They lived that, and they lived persecution on the island due to independence being somewhat of a taboo subject. And
it wasn't somewhat. They bombed a fucking city. Let's be honest about it. It wasn't somewhat. I mean, they tortured people at Ramey Air Force Base. It was not somewhat.
Yeah, but thank you for correcting the record. It was oppression, and some people say it was basically genocide. And when we talk about this, it's that us as young people, they tell us all the time, "Oh, you don't have fear. You don't know what it's like. You didn't live through that." Well, that's true. I didn't live through it, but who's gonna impose it on me now? Is it them? The people that I'm saying they did this a long time ago, they did this to you? Are you saying that just because I want something different, I'm gonna be punished for it? Is that what you're trying to say? I don't understand sometimes as a young person the arguments based on fear that some of my grandparents tell me, because it was all based on the Red Scare, McCarthy, and all these old school Republican tactics to just scare people out of thinking different.
Yeah, Ian, you got anything there?
Yeah, I actually just like thinking of something randomly, and it's how the citizen movement will use it to incentivize you to vote. And it's so powerful because what that they want the island or they want the island to do better, to progress, but the only thing actually it's adding onto a problem. And it's not about exactly we take these federal phones and we're not going to take them, but we do have to create instant that people not that people be sit comfortably and not really want to work and want to do dignified, honest to God progress on the island. It's a whole thing about just like it's just keep receiving these federal funds, and we're not. And if we're honest about it, we're not gonna grow freaking book. And it's important to stress this line because you see that this is the only thing that people promote, but have people talking about actual model economy. You have actual clouds that are specified to maximum detail. I mean, you don't even have only the Puerto Rican independence front. You have its own had its own program that the socialists that were doing in had its own program, and they constantly done the work, constantly done the effort to know that once we change the system that we live right now. We cannot have a plan. We cannot, even though it probably we just like the easiest thing that will do. We can't support what needs to be done. A lot of things will change, and it's happening. But we're prepared for that. We're prepared to do it in order to be a more progressive and more unified Puerto Rico.
Guys, this has been fantastic. I want to thank both of you for coming on. Is there if people want to get involved or learn more, where can they go?
They go to our Facebook page, or Twitter page, or Instagram page. We have a form in the bio, or you can just like put all your info. will send their contact to the devil that is in charge of their style and start collaborate with people that are cool. So you go to our pages that are all at Owen, and you can find whole that things online by going in audio, but once you find the big one, it's even from there.
Also,
I'll include the link. Go ahead.
just wanted to add, there is also for people who are in the diaspora, there is also the DMV area. We have a page on Twitter for that. We also have the Diaspora Puertorriqueña for Independence Twitter. We also have the Connecticut branch for Partido Independentista. They also have a Twitter, and one in New York, if I'm not mistaken. We have a couple of those. Just wanted to add, people who want to learn about the government plans that Juan Dalmau and Partido Independentista espouses, you can just go to juandalmau.com and look up Patria Nueva. There's a PDF, and it's all there. All the information's there. You want to read up on theory, you can read up on theory, or you can just listen to David talk about it.
Or you could be like me and send Juan a donation. All right, guys. Thanks again. Thanks again for joining the podcast.
So much.
And thank you.
And so much.